Here in Israel, we just stepped into ceasefire mode. People are out there in the cafes, and now we are kind of in a. Are we going to hunker down again? Are we going? Like, I have tickets to fly in 2 weeks. Am I flying? Am I not flying? Do I make plans? Not make plans? That's the situation that we feel ourselves here in the land of Israel. Somebody who really has a great grasp of international affairs is Jonathan Conricus, who's a senior fellow at the FDD, Federation for Defense of Democracies, focused on the Middle East. It's an absolute pleasure to have Jonathan with us. Jonathan Conricus, shalom and welcome.
Shalom, Ishai.
Okay, am I flying in 2 weeks or not? Like, what's going on here? Should the kids go back to school or not? It's a tricky moment. Of course, we can't, make decisions on international affairs based on the need of our kids to go back to school. But we did go very quickly from a moment of from red hiding in or defending ourselves in bomb shelters to green. We're out there in the cafes. Schools are open. We're going flying. We're going everywhere. And now, just a few days later, a sense of foreboding. Yes, the military conflict is about to start up again. What's your sense?
Yeah, so, nevuah nitna lashotim, right? Prophecy is a fool's errand. Wouldn't want to give any prophecies, and you and I and many other Israelis are in the same boat. I too have flight tickets, and I too am planning to leave, but there are many, many moving parts in what's going on, and I think without being able to provide answers, I think it'll be good for people to understand exactly the moving parts and how they matter and what kind of influence they'll have. But bottom line, when I look at the situation, I struggle to see a situation where we don't go back to military activity. Maybe it'll be more intense, less intense, but I struggle to see a scenario where things go back to pre-Roaring Lion operation times. I can't really see that happening, mostly based on how the Iranians have been hardballing. So the moving parts and what really is at play here is, I would say, foolhardy and really self-defeating Iranian arrogance. They are so arrogant, and when you see the list of demands that they came with to negotiations with the US, after having sustained significant military setbacks and after having used all of the heaviest tools at their expense. The Iranians have used all of the heaviest and most important tools that they have at their disposal, firing at gas and oil fields in the Middle East and closing the Hormuz Strait. Beyond that, they don't have a lot of more runway to use. And on the other hand, the US and Israel have a lot more of damage that they can do. And therefore, it was odd for me to see the Iranians posturing as if they just won a military confrontation and if they are in a position to be dictating terms. But they're arrogant. I think they're making the cardinal sin of believing their own propaganda and perhaps believing what they read in the New York Times and on CNN, where people could be forgiven for understanding as if Iran won this war and if the Iranian regime is on the upper hand. It isn't, and they have not won this round of confrontation. But what's interesting is that the Iranian regime, it looks as if they really genuinely believe that they're in a position to make terms, dictate terms to the US and indirectly to Israel. That puts us in a situation where the demands that were given by the Iranians, almost all of them, out of the list of 10 demands that they gave, they're non-starters. Payments and reparations to the Iranians, and a defreezing or canceling sanctions on Iran, Iranian control of the Hormuz Strait in the future, continuing with their nuclear program, and of course keeping Hezbollah and all of the other terror organizations intact, and the US and Israel agreeing never to attack Iran again. All of these claims are outlandish. And a part of me is happy that they made these ridiculous claims because it made it swifter and easier, I think, for the US negotiators who came there in good faith with a serious team, the highest level of decision makers in the US, with military experts, with nuclear experts, with sanctions experts. Everybody who was relevant to negotiations from the US perspective was represented in the room. And the US signaled that these are serious negotiations. They're not window dressing just for photo ops, but this is a real effort by the US to end the war and to achieve the aims that the US set forward to achieve without having to necessitate more damage and more killing. The Iranians obviously had other aims and other thoughts on reality, and part of me is happy that they are as arrogant as they are. Now, for Israel, I think...
Is it a bluff, though? Just I don't want you to forget your point, but are they bluffing, or is it a tactic, or is it delusion?
So what my assessment is, which is very little more than a maybe a little bit experienced guess, is that the Iranian establishment, the Iranian regime, has grown accustomed to having their way in negotiations with various American presidents. And I think the muscle memory of the Iranian establishment is to bluster. It is to talk tough. It is to bully their way in the region. It is to bully their way internationally. And it is to bully different American administrations and presidents. And I think their very fundamental miscalculation is that they still haven't wrapped their heads around the fact that this is a different administration headed by a different US president who has said and put a lot of his personal presidential capital and prestige online, saying, you, the Iranian regime, will never have nuclear weapons. And if they haven't understood it yet, then, I don't know what else the president needs to do for them to understand. But by now, they should have been able to understand that this guy doesn't bluff, and he is not weak like his predecessors, and he doesn't fold like his predecessors when it came to negotiations. But I have sympathy for the Iranians because this is what they've become accustomed to. They've gotten away with, bluffing and being the bullies and getting their way. And maybe they think that is, the muscle memory, and that's what they think that they can continue to do. But the situation is profoundly different. I think what the president has done now with this very interesting move of, okay, if you think you're going to stop traffic in Hormuz, I'm going to stop it before it even gets to Hormuz. So I'm going to basically take the sting out of your poison or the sting out of your bite. That's an interesting move. And from a US perspective, looking at, if I'm not Chinese, Japanese, Indian, South Korean, or Singaporean, and to a certain extent European, that's a pretty smart move because the US has so much deeper financial assets and buffers that they can use in order to cushion any impact on the US economy, whereas the Iranians do not. They are, according to assessments that I'm reading and getting from the IDF and elsewhere, some parts of the Iranian economy is really on fumes. They don't have a lot left in the tank, if at all. And such a blow, preventing the Iranian regime from shipping oil to China and India and selling it, could be very, very detrimental, perhaps even lethal, to the ability of the IRGC and the Iranian regime to sustain their war efforts. And, at the end of the day, up until now, I checked a few hours ago, IRGC officers, Basij officers, when they go to the bank to get their monthly salary, there's still money in the bank. And even though the currency has been greatly depreciated, but at the end of the day, there's still money, and the IRGC still has money in their bank accounts. That's a situation that needs to change fundamentally, and real pressure on the regime, on the security forces, will be felt once its people are not being paid. And that may take some time. But I mean, when you look at the other levers that are available here, look at the amount of Iranian money that is in the Qatari, Emirati, and Omani banking system. That's money which is there for the taking, that can, and in my mind and many others who think like me, should have been frozen and seized a long time ago. The first missile and drone that the Iranians fired on the Emirates, on their gas, on their oil assets and on their capital, etc. That should have been the first step, signaling to the Iranians that you are bullies and we know how to deal with bullies. We're going to hit you where it hurts, and that is your money. And to be clear, the Iranians do not have, except for crypto, and direct dealings in yuan with the Chinese. Except for that, they have no other venue of getting parts of international currency and markets if it isn't for Qatar and the UAE, and to a lesser extent Oman. And that's, something that I think is important to keep in mind. There are so many additional pressure levers that are there to be used and leveraged against Iran that the West hasn't even touched. While the Iranians, as I said before, they've already gone all out. They've used their doomsday card, which is the heaviest and most impactful tool that they had, which I think is going to backfire, and that is closing the Strait of Hormuz. So where's this going to go? Difficult to say. My guess would be that we still have a few days left of negotiations, and I think that the president genuinely prefers negotiations and not fighting over fighting. I think this is a president who cares deeply about the lives of U.S. servicemen, and I think there's a high level of sensitivity towards the safety and well-being of U.S. servicemen, which is a welcome thing for any leader sending personnel into combat. And I think we're going to see a few more days of negotiations, but if the Iranians will continue to be as arrogant and as stubborn as they are, then I think we will go back to fighting. And then, up until now, the US and Israel have been fighting with maybe a hand tied behind their back and with gloves on. If we go back to fighting, I think that at least one glove will be off, and Israel and the US will be striking targets that up until now haven't been struck. And they could be very, very detrimental for the Iranian regime.
Jonathan Conricus, another issue that the Iranian regime keeps on saying is one of their core issues is Lebanon. They're like, well, we want a ceasefire in Lebanon as well. We want to basically continue to control Lebanon through Hezbollah. You fought in Lebanon. You've seen it. I've seen it as well. It's a beautiful land. It's very historic, and yet that country it's not a country anymore. It's a shell. And Israel has been dealing, especially our northern communities and the rest of the country as well, with racketeering from Lebanon. But the north has really suffered. And we have communities that have really not been able to reconstitute themselves properly, like Kiryat Shmona and others. And I'm hearing reports about what a challenge it is to reconstitute the north. There's whole departments now in the Israeli government trying to help the north rise again. But you hear mayors on TV, mayors saying, hey, we can't really go back yet. We can't push our people to go back if we don't have safety. The IDF is now operating in a new way in Lebanon. They're really clearing out South Lebanon in a way that we haven't seen it before. And this is a kind of Gaza doctrine that's now being incorporated into the north. It's a kind of doctrine of like, ad kan. That's it. We're done. There's no more playing around. Like, this is not working. So we got to change tacks. And they are destroying houses and the stuff that has been hiding, terrorist infrastructures, and asking civilians to move north because we're creating a new buffer zone. Tell me a little bit about Lebanon, and is this new way of dealing with things going to solve our problems? Is the north of Israel going to be reborn again?
Yeah, so everything you said is, of course, a very good framing and introduction to what's happening. And I'll add some color and context to it. So for years, what's been going on in Lebanon is that the Lebanese state, in its weakness, in its inability to control its sovereign territory, has been used and abused by foreign powers as a launchpad of conducting indirect warfare against Israel. The first ones to do it in the early and mid-70s were the Palestinians. The PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, used southern Lebanon, much to the despise and discomfort of southern Lebanese, but they used southern Lebanon in order to launch terror attacks against northern Israeli communities. That brought about a need for Israel to invade into Lebanon and push those terrorists away from Israeli communities. That's 1978 Litani operation, which was then followed, because it wasn't enough, with the 1982 First Lebanon War, which got all the way up to Beirut and ended with PLO being sent out into Tunisia for a few years. But the story of Lebanon has continued, and the same problem of an inability to control its own borders has continued. For many years, the Syrians dominated, controlled, and bullied their way around Lebanon. And since the mid-80s, early 90s, Iran has been the dominant force through its proxy on the ground, Hezbollah. Now, the good thing is that today Hezbollah is at the weakest point that I've ever seen it in its entirety. They are the weakest militarily and the weakest politically, and they are facing real threats and challenges, both domestic and, of course, military, against Israel. For many years, and this is what you spoke about, that, Ad Kan, the situation is different and we're not going to change the rules of the game, is that Lebanon allowed, in violation of Security Council resolutions and in violation of their own sovereignty, they allowed Hezbollah to use southern Lebanon in order to attack northern Israeli communities and to pose a threat to Israel. We fought them, we pushed them back, but then we retreated back to the internationally established ceasefire line, or the blue line, the line of withdrawal, which is the de facto border between Israel and Lebanon. But then what happened is that Hezbollah again violated Security Council resolutions, Lebanese sovereignty, and they again used Lebanon in order to attack Israel on October 8th, and again did so after Israel attacked, after Operation Epic Fury and Roaring Lion in 40 odd days ago. Hezbollah decided to join in, again, against the will of the Lebanese government and the Lebanese people. But of course, Hezbollah doesn't serve neither Lebanon, its government, elected authorities, or the interest of the people. They serve a foreign ruler, and that is Iran. But what's happening now is that Israel is saying, okay, we're going to change the equation here, and we're not going to allow you, the state of Lebanon, and Hezbollah, to continue doing what you've done, because it hasn't worked well for Israeli civilians. This puts Israeli civilians at risk. So what we're doing is we're going to take territory, which is the best and easiest way to deny an enemy the ability to attack you, is that you seize territory and you clear it of enemy infrastructure and personnel. That's very plainly what Israel is doing. And as we speak, Ishai, we have brave Israeli soldiers on the ground in southern Lebanon. As we speak, they're attacking a Hezbollah stronghold in Binj Bel, which is the largest town in southern Lebanon, a few miles from the border, but around 50 to 70,000 people usually live in Binj Bel, a little bit more. So it's a sizable town. It's been cleared of most of the population, but there's still Hezbollah infrastructure and personnel there. And the IDF is taking it as we speak. Now, What the IDF is doing, you said destroying infrastructure. What the IDF is doing is demolishing infrastructure that was used by Hezbollah in order to target Israeli civilians. To the untrained and unknowing eye, it looks like a Lebanese city or a Lebanese village, like a civilian building. But that isn't what it is. All of the infrastructure that the IDF is destroying is infrastructure that Hezbollah used in order to conduct illegal warfare against Israel, whether it was to store weapons, to hide fighters there, to fire rockets or missiles from, or to use snipers or jamming equipment, or as an observation post. Any of the above or all of the above could have been done, and that is what the IDF is doing. So what we're going to see at the end of these ground operations is a buffer zone, which is going to be relatively void of structures and anything above ground, and hopefully below ground as well. so that in the future, when and if Lebanese civilians will come back to southern Lebanon, there won't be infrastructure close to the border that Hezbollah can use as a launch pad hidden as civilian infrastructure to attack Israeli civilians. So it's a preventive, defensive measure which is being taken by Israel. If you ask me, and if you ask people who live in northern Israel, I'm sure that they would say this is about 20 years too late. It should have been done a long, long time ago, denying Hezbollah the ability to have launch pads against Israeli civilians, but better late than never. And that is how Israel is applying pressure. But in parallel to that, what Israel is also doing is striking locations in southern Lebanon, striking locations in northeastern Lebanon, and in Beirut. Sadly, there's American pressure on Israel, and the last 24 hours or so, there's very little Israeli activity in Beirut and Baalbek, only activity in southern Lebanon. I suppose that's kind of a bit of a tax that Israel is paying to the U.S. so that, you can see that on the map here. I don't know why you're using New York Times stuff, Ishai, but you can see on the map here that Israeli forces are deployed in the south and basically pushing Shiite civilians out of southern Lebanon, informing them that southern Lebanon is a war zone, and if they care about their safety, they should move towards the north, and they should go to other places that are outside of the main combat area, because Hezbollah uses their homes and houses and roads and bridges and everything else in order to fight against Israel. So, and that, of course, has its merit as well, because Israel is applying pressure on the Lebanese state by indicating that they are going to need to solve the situation, and they're going to need to take sovereign control of their country. And if they continue to allow Hezbollah to use Lebanon as a launchpad against Israel, this time it's not going to be free of charge. There's going to be a price tag attached to it, and it's going to be more permanent and more long-term than what they've become accustomed to in the past.
Jonathan Conricus, thank you so much for that excellent and erudite answer and explaining to us what's happening in Lebanon. There's one more question I have, one last one, if you could give me just one.
Of course.
I appreciate that. There was yet another front that Prime Minister Netanyahu actually fought on this week. We're dealing with, we just talked about Lebanon. There's the war with Iran. But there's also the narrative front, what I call the narrative war. In this case, it was actually with Spain. Here's Prime Minister Netanyahu talking about it. In Hebrew, we'll translate. Maybe you want to translate that for us?
Yeah, the Prime Minister said that the Spanish authorities and the Spanish Prime Minister, have continuously slandered Israeli soldiers, the actions of the IDF and Israeli soldiers. Prime Minister said that we are the most moral military in the world. I'll put a parenthesis around that and come back to that, but that's what he said. And that as a consequence of Spain's consistent attitude and actions against Israel, the Prime Minister, has ordered the Spanish representatives to be immediately removed from the International Coordination Center in Kiryat Gat that monitors and oversees the situation in Gaza, part of the Board of Peace, and be expelled from the country because they are seen as extremist and, from an Israeli perspective, definitely not wanted, because they continue to oppose Israel and undermine Israel's legitimacy.
In simple terms, they're anti-Israel, and they're trying to operate within Israel. We're not going to have it anymore. Just like you said before, the muscle memory of Iran is that there's going to be a weak American president. So too, Spain is operating within Israel with a muscle memory like, they're going to do whatever we Europeans say. They're not going to stand up against us. Prime Minister Netanyahu, with the kind of angry face, is like, I'm kicking these guys out of here.
Yeah, and I think that's the right thing to do. I think Spanish actions, Spanish diplomatic and financial actions are absolutely appalling. That's a country that you can see they are free falling. I mean, this prime minister continues to make what seems to me as horrible choices. Instead of siding up with the West, fighting against a totalitarian regime that oppresses its own people, that abuses minorities, that denies its people the very basic rights, which is something that allegedly this Spanish government speaks about and wants to be a champion of, because I constantly hear them harping about civil rights and about liberties and rule of law, etc., etc. Yet this Spanish government sides with the Iranian regime, prevents the US from using bases on Spanish soil as part of NATO in order to conduct warfare against the regime, prevents the US from flying over Spanish airspace, and is the first Western country to reinstitute and reactivate their embassy in Tehran, which is just a slap in the face of the West, of the US, of democracies. Abhorrent behavior. No surprise that they're behaving like they are against Israel. Really a country that, or a government of a country that seems to have totally lost their moral compass. I welcome what the prime minister did, and I think there's definitely room for the foreign ministry to consider more steps against Spain, because that seems to be a country that really is losing its way. My only comment, and as I said, I put a small parenthesis on what the prime minister said. I think that the IDF, having served in the IDF and spoken on behalf of it for many years, I think the IDF is a very, very moral fighting force. I think our moral standards are high. I think the core quality of IDF personnel is excellent, with excellent values. Like any other military, we make mistakes. And like other militaries, we also have people who do things that they're not supposed to do. I never like to use that catchphrase of the most moral army in the world. I think it's not a professional thing to say, because there's no real comparison and there's no real way of comparing and measuring. And I will just say that I think from my personal experience and from working with other militaries, professionals, they hold us in very high esteem. Our processes, our abilities, the way that we conduct ourselves, the way that we implement international military law, international humanitarian law, the way that we try to minimize harm to non-combatants, the munitions we use, the tactics that we use, all of that, which is of course a mirror image to what you hear in Western media. But when you speak with military professionals on the ground, American, even French and British, they will tell you, not on camera, but they will tell you to your face that what you guys are doing, what the IDF is doing, what the IDF did in Gaza, what the IDF is doing now in Lebanon is way above and beyond what they themselves have done in the past and what they themselves will be able to do in future combat scenarios against terrorist organizations hiding behind civilians in densely populated urban areas. And I have heard that from multiple generals and colonels and lieutenant colonels that I've personally spoken with. So,
but the term is annoying, right? The term is a little bit annoying. It's especially annoying because at the end of the day, you really want your army to be fierce and scary and strong and an instrument of violence. So therefore, when we talk about the most moral, it's a bit of it's not exactly the signal that we want to send our enemies. We want to be moral. We want to be the most moral, but not necessarily, broadcast that to the world, but rather say this is a ruthless, fighting force. Whatever it really is our business and our morality. But we want to actually signal to the world, don't mess with Israel, right?
Yeah. I think, and I think that's the message that we are sending through, what we did in Gaza, what we're doing against Hezbollah in Lebanon, what the magnificent Israeli Air Force has been able to accomplish together with Mossad and the Americans, of course, against mighty Iran, hundreds of kilometers away. That message, I think, is sent loud and clear. And I agree with you. It's not good branding to be, talking about things that are not relevant as an army. War is a horrible, dirty, violent, nasty business. And militaries are in that business. It is not a beauty contest, and it's not a how nice are you contest. It is a horrible profession. It is the application of violence that you do out of necessity. And I think the IDF does it very well while keeping its core values as the military of a sovereign, democratic Jewish state. And I suggest we put, that old slogan to rest and focus on kicking ass, winning wars, deterring our enemies, and protecting our civilians and our homeland, and giving every terrorist and wannabe enemy good food for thought. Will it be worth it for me and for the people who support me to attack the Jewish state?
Jonathan Conricus from FDD. You're a senior fellow at the Federation for the Defense of Democracies.
The foundation.
Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Thank you for that correction. Served in the IDF for 24 years as both a combat commander in Lebanon, Gaza Strip, and as a military diplomat, foreign relations expert, international spokesman, retired as lieutenant colonel. And you were the first Israeli officer to be at the United Nations, during which you provided military and strategic analysis for UN peacekeeping forces. But now you are fighting Israel's battle on the narrative front, which is so important. God bless you, Jonathan. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Shai. Thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure to see you.
Kol hakavod. May we see the victory of the Jewish people, and of course all freedom-loving peoples, because Israel's victory is not just for Israel at the end, right? It's really something that will give this whole region a new life.
Like so many times in history, Osirak 1981, Dir Azur 2007, and I can give other examples. Israel is doing the heavy lifting. This time we're not doing it alone. We're doing it side by side with the Americans, but Israel is doing the heavy lifting that will benefit people of the region, and I hope, God willing, also the entire world, by really diminishing the threat, the specter of a nuclear threat from Iran, and perhaps beyond that. But that's for the next episode of when you bring me on the next time.
That's right. Amen. God bless you, Jonathan. Thanks again for being with us.
Thank you, Shai.
All right, folks. Amazing discussion with Jonathan Conricus. You could see why he's one of the best that Israel has. And Israel needs it because we have a physical kinetic war and we have some of the best pilots in the world. But in the narrative war, we have a lot of challenges and a lot of effort has been put by the enemies of Israel to besmirch our good name around the world. Actually, I have a video coming out soon about Mehdi Hassan and his arguments against the legitimacy of Israel and Israel's very right to exist. That's right. He challenges Israel's very right to exist. So I hope you're going to be with me for that. All right, folks. God bless you wherever you are. Stay strong, stay connected, stay part of God's great broadcast. And that is the ingathering of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. Lots of love, lots of blessings, lots of good energy. God bless you wherever you are, and shalom.